Alright. Um, New movie to talk about. Well, it's not new, but I just recently saw it. Cirque de Freak, The Vampire's Assistant. Came out in theaters maybe a year to 2 years ago. I don't know. Anyway, has the guy from Dewey Cox in it, has a bunch of other people I don't know. I We are going to name them though. So there's Dewey Cox, there's Justin, who's the good kid, Steve, who's the bad kid. Um, there's Tall Man. There's I don't know, See Into the Future Man. I don't know. Okay. Uh, Basically the storyline. Justin um, is friends with Steve, and they've been friends for like a long time, like old high school, well, childhood friends. They're in high school now. Um, Steve gets into trouble. Justin's the goody two shoes of the school, and his parents forbid Justin see Steve anymore. So, with following that parents' rule, they decide to go to Cirque de Freak or whatever show. So it's a bunch of freaks just kind of parading around in an auditorium, which I thought was very high class of them, and not just doing it as a sideshow in a circus tent or at a state fair. So they actually had their own show for this. And you find out that Justin's obsessed with spiders, which really doesn't have much of a plot of a story. But Steve is obsessed with vampires? Or bats? It's vampires, yeah. Basically, Dewey Cox comes out and he's a vampire. And Steve knows this because he recognizes him from one of his vampire books, which are based on facts. They are not fiction. So he goes backstage and is like, hey, I want to be a vampire. And they're like, no, because that's ridiculous. You're a kid and your blood tastes bad. Meanwhile, Justin stole the vampire's spider. Ended up next day at school where he hid the spider. It went and it bit Steve because Steve was trying to kill it, so it was a self-defense bite. And it's a very poisonous, deadly spider, but I guess it takes probably a day or something for this poison to kick in and kill people, because Steve was just like in a coma or something. And meanwhile, Justin goes to the vampire and is like, hey, can I get an antidote for my bud over here? The vampire's like, yeah, but you have to become half vampire, which I'm still not entirely sure what a half vampire is, but because they exchange blood or whatever, and I guess that's what you need to become a vampire, and your saliva has healing powers, and you still need to drink blood, but you can go out in the daylight. And can I say, if you're gonna have a vampire, please don't deviate from a vampire. It is a bloodsucker. I don't care if you can go out in the day or not, but don't sparkle when you go out into the day. That's insane. We're not gay vampires, okay? They're supposed to be terrifying. They're not supposed to be diamondy or whatever. Anyway, drink blood, take a mortal as a wife, be a bigamist, whatever. Don't deviate from the original vampire all that much, because it's not cool. You can't come up with a cooler vampire than just an original vampire. Anyway, I guess these vampires' special powers, though, was flicking, which you learn later, and that's just running super fast, I guess. Whatever. Justin becomes a vampire, saves Steve, has to fake his own death so he doesn't have to live with his family anymore, because he almost killed his little sister in one scene. Lives with all the circus freaks that they saw already, because that's where these vampires live. Which, Dewey Cox and Justin are vampires. They are the vampires they don't kill people when they drink their blood. They just take like a small dose of it, I guess, and leave people to live, which is a smart idea because then you can just drink from them time and time again. And then somehow, the big part of the story I'm missing. Steve finds out Justin's a vampire. Steve wants to become a vampire. Guy who sees in the future, I guess he's an evil guy. And Dewey Cox is really afraid of this evil guy because I think he does want to kind of start a war and pretty much take over the world in that. And he needs Steve, but I think he really needs Justin in order to do this. He needs both, I think, to do this. By the way, this is a continuing story. The movie doesn't actually end. It goes into a sequel. But I don't know if they're going to make a sequel because this movie didn't do well. Obviously. Couldn't imagine why not. It was just fantastic. Anyway, Steve becomes basically a vampire, but they call themselves Vampanese because they kill people when they decide to drink their blood. So they needed a stupider name in order to distinguish themselves. And they want to kill the vampires, and apparently there are only 3 left of vampires. They already knocked off one of them. They need Dewey Cox and a guy that showed up twice. So Steve becomes a Vampanese. Justin's a vampire. Justin falls in love with Monkey Girl, and he becomes real good friends with Snake Kid. Things that don't really matter happen kind of in the middle to move you along. In the end, there's a big scene between Dewey Cox, Head Vampanese. Dewey Cox kills Head Vampanese. Now it's going to start a war. But in order to stop the war, Justin wants to kill Steve. But backtracking about 10 to 5 minutes before that, Steve did steal Justin's family and Monkey Girl. Gave him a choice on which one he wants to save, which one he wants to drink the blood. By the way, Justin hasn't drank any blood yet because he doesn't want to be a vampire. Oh yeah, these vampires' other special skills on how they're going to defeat people. They have fingernails that are like knives. And they can slash through tree bark, which was shown on how awesome these nails are. That's literally what they use to defend themselves with. Because once again, let's find a girly feature, stick them on some vampires, and then call it good because that's terrifying. Anyway, but Justin has weak-ass fingernails because he's not drinking blood. So then Justin drinks Monkey Girl's blood because she escapes with her monkey tail. And he's able to beat Steve, but then Man Who Sees Into the Future stops it all because he can stop time. Then Dewey Cox kills Vampanese Man, kind of start a war, but instead of actually starting a war, See Into the Future Man and Steve run off. Justin and Dewey Cox go back to the Cirque du Freak. They decide to allow Justin to become one of them. He's rewarded with his very own coffin to sleep in. And then guy we see twice, this is the second time he appears, comes in and says, hey, we should run. That's it. It was ridiculous. Once again, a variant of vampire that's not up to standards of what a vampire should be. But if you can see it for free, I'd say see it. Because it's not bad to watch, even though it's poorly made, there's bad animation, it's completely ridiculous, but it's something to do for 2 hours in case you have nothing else to do. And by 2, I think it was an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes or something. It wasn't actually 2 hours, but just allot that amount of time for it. Alright.